Hi, everybody. Just a quick announcement before we get to the conversation. I'm recording this message on the 25th of May, 2020. And within the last week, there has been a devastating Cyclone Amphan, that has hit parts of eastern India, particularly the state of West Bengal. West Bengal happens to be the state that my mother lives in. She's here with me in Bombay during lockdown, but she lives in the city of Kolkata, formerly known as Calcutta. The guest on this episode also happens to be from Calcutta. So I thought it would be sensible to provide a link to a Google document which comprehensively lists all of the organizations that you can donate to help support the relief efforts from Cyclone Amphan. I know at a time like this when the COVID-19 pandemic has spread throughout the world, many of us have been dealing with some pretty difficult circumstances. Many of us have felt a contraction in our finances. And despite this, many of us have been quite generous and helpful to the people around us and, in many cases, the communities that we come from. That being said, if you do have the ability to help out in any way with regards to the relief efforts for this cyclone, you should be able to find the link to this document in the description. I'll definitely put it in the description for the YouTube version of this podcast, and I expect that I'll be able to figure out how to include the link in the Apple and Spotify versions as well. The link will also be included on my website, flossdailyproductions.com. Thank you for listening. Hello world, I'm here with Suyasha Sengupta. She is a singer, songwriter, producer, composer extraordinaire. Suyasha Sengupta, welcome to the program.
Hi, it's so exciting to finally do this because I've never done a podcast in my life. So, yeah.
Hey, well, this is the
cool.
first time for everything. But before we get deep into the podcasting territory, when you're speaking English, which pronunciation of your name do you default to? Like more of a Bengali pronunciation or more of the Hindiized kind of version?
I think it's the Hindiized one because I call myself Suyasha. Well, because my parents decided to call me Suyasha. But check this. So the Bangla way to say my name is actually Shujosha.
I was wondering about that. Because Sengupta I can understand it would be Shengupto. But so I was just like, how does one say this in Bengali? I was scratching my head, I'm going to be honest, my bomb credibility.
Bangla doesn't have a ya, or like a y, so it by default becomes a j. So it's Shujosha.
That's something I never thought of. I always, I mean, the and the thing is the one that kind of, and I guess V and, is it V and B that get interchanged as well?
I think there's no F, so everything is a PH by default. And there is a B and a V, but you don't say Vairav, you say Bhoirav or something. It's a fun language. It's basically radically different from Hindi, I would say.
Yeah.
But close but pretty different.
Yes, related, but there are just like some fun consonants that get switched. Okay, cool. So the first time I was ever exposed to your music was in 2000. I think it was 2015, when I saw the Ganesh Talkies perform at Hard Rock Cafe Andheri with it was Last Remaining Light. I think, right? There was a...
Oh, yeah.
And it was the first time I saw you guys play, and I was like, wow, this is like... I mean, since that time, that band has been in my top, like, bands that I've seen in India since I moved here. And it actually came up in another podcast I was doing when we, like... I was speaking with Jishnu Guha. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah,
but-
yeah, I heard also. Yeah, thank you for the shout out. that brought back some good memories.
Yeah, so I was just like, we were talking about the Light Years Explode and how they are also like one of my favorite bands. You know, like
I love
top
them.
two. Oh, they're
Yeah.
so good. And I mean, I
so
guess
good.
if you heard that podcast, same reason that is just like so much energy. The punk rock kind of attitude was just undeniable, and I've been a fan of yours ever since. And so I'm a little bit confused about this. Maybe you can clarify. Is that band now on some sort of indefinite hiatus?
So, Shombit, the drummer, he's now moved to Bombay. He's a part of a bunch of exciting projects. I am in Cal. I'm kind of in flux. Rohit is not really playing music anymore. So, yeah, I feel like we had a really, really good run. So, no regrets that way. But now we're kind of all doing our own things.
Yeah, as it happens. And so after that, you put out a project as Plastic Parvati, which I guess is like a solo moniker for you, but you worked on that record with someone else, did you not?
Yeah, so Plastic Parvati was basically, I think when I was with the band, I sort of had all these ideas in my head. And also I realized that I needed to learn how to sort of produce the sounds that I heard in my head. So that's when I started getting into music production. And we've been working with Meeti Adhikari from day one. So, we're extremely privileged that way. So once I think the band had put out a record and we were kind of like, it was an off-season period where I had a lot of time in my hands. So I just went over to his place and I had all these really badly produced songlets. And we were talking like drums all over the place. Like I didn't know how to auto-tune my vocals. So we sort of spent an afternoon just listening to everything and we kind of made a list. We were like, okay, these can work. I can make potential songs out of these. And some just went to the garbage bin. So then, it became a super collaborative process where he not only helped me produce it, but, I learned so much from him. I think everything I know about music pretty much comes from him. So...
Oh, it's very interesting.
So, yeah.
I want to ask you more about, like, in a minute, I want to ask you more about the type, like, what you've learned ever since you started, broke away into this solo kind of thing. But I wanted to rewind maybe just because I personally have no idea, like, say before the Ganesh Talkies started, like, how did you get to that point? Like, when did you pick up the guitar, start singing? What were your influences? What was that like?
So, I come from a very Bengali family, which means that growing up there was always music playing and I was enrolled in dance classes and poetry recitation classes and all of that.
Sounds familiar.
Exactly. Yeah. You know what I'm saying, right? But music was something that I really sort of related to, and I think it was when I was around 14 or 15, I discovered Nirvana through bootleg CDs that my cousin had, and that completely changed my worldview because I was like, oh my god, what is this music? There's guitars.
Around what year was that, would you say?
Damn, I think this was in the early 2000s. Like,
okay.
Yeah. So, because I was a pretty late entrant into the world of Western music. Also because, growing up, there was always Elvis and Nat King Cole and maybe some Lionel Richie. But there was, and of course, there was the Backstreet Boys and Aqua and all of that. But we didn't have access to music like kids today have. They have YouTube and Spotify and basically they have the internet, but we didn't, us 90s kids, we didn't have that.
Well, I remember when I would come to Calcutta, like my history is that I would come back to India like almost every year. By the time like I was in, after the third grade for me, I would come back every 2 years and we would spend like a pretty substantial amount of time in India. Some time in Bombay and then some of the time in Calcutta. And I remember just like kind of like what you're saying, the access to music was pretty scattered and random. And I had this similar type of conversation with David Abraham where we were talking, like, I didn't have cable TV in Canada, but for some reason we did have cable TV in our flat in Bombay. And then when I would go to Calcutta, I would just stay with my aunt in Chitla. Like, I refused to stay with my mom. And I remember like watching MTV and Channel V and that kind of stuff. And I was like, my only frame of reference for music videos, not music per se, but just like music videos, was from those visits. And so in a certain kind of way, I was really exposed to music when I would come here, which seems to be the opposite of what like a lot of people are telling me. But then on the other hand, like sometimes, like I come from a small town in Canada. So sometimes I would try to like look for rare, tapes or CDs. And I remember, especially in Calcutta, like it would be weird shops, like like some corner somewhere, and it wouldn't always be super easy to find stuff. So it's
exactly. So we did have that advantage where I think once we knew about a band or an act, we had this neighborhood mixtape guy who would sort of compile cassettes and CDs, like super bootleg. We're talking about super illegal, like But that's what. But I think our struggle was more not just finding the music, but discovering all of these artists, because my cousin listened to a lot of metal, so I heard a lot of Black Sabbath, but I didn't like it as much as say grunge music, which is still to date my favorite genre.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm like
So besides Nirvana, like what else would you?
Soundgarden.
Oh man, you're speaking to me right now.
Alice in Chains. Yeah, just like this is like a teenage Suyasha, like just like being full on rock and roll, very angry with the world. Yeah, I haven't let that part go, I think. Yeah,
we all get a little angry sometimes. It's not exactly like everything is sane in the world around us these days.
I know, and I'm surprised more people don't feel that angst, because right now politically, socially, it's not a very happy time. Like I have mad respect for musicians who make very nice, sweet love songs, because I would say I'm jealous, because I can't do that. I've tried, and all my love songs sound like I'm just being cynical and grumpy.
Yeah. I find myself to be pretty hysterical on a day-to-day basis when I scroll through my news feed or like whatever news sources I have access to. I'm finding it more and more difficult to what would I say, rein in my hysteria and try and be sensible, because a lot of the news is pretty bananas.
I know. I feel you. It's a very strange, interesting, but very strange time, I think.
Yeah.
Just globally. And it's not like, you and I in India, we were sort of having this major existential crisis. I think it's just a global thing right now. So.
Yeah, there is that. And that's actually, it's interesting you say that, because I it's true, absolutely, that it's a global thing. And then it's like, it's hard to square with just being concerned for the place that you're at right now. I go back and forth between saying, okay, this is a global kind of thing, and then not wanting to sort of shift the blame to some larger structure and be like, well, no, but like we're here in this place, and XYZ is happening, and you know what I mean? Like, anyway, I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense or rambling.
No, I know, I can understand, because it is weird to be here, right? Like, because on one hand, we're all, we've grown up in a very global world, and, we have access to so much information. We have friends from all over the world. But at the same time, our problems are very localized. Yeah. So
they're unique, but then at the same time, there is this global resonance that seems like a similar type of thing is happening in other places. But then, like, India is quite unique. And the types of fracturings that we're seeing also are unique to our society as well. Societies, I guess.
So societies.
Yeah.
If you try and explain India to somebody who hasn't visited, it's a pretty Herculean task, because
absolutely,
you go for like 50 kilometers east to west, and the language has changed. People's food habits have changed. The gods they pray to have changed. It's a lot.
Yep.
To sum it up, it's a lot.
I often try and describe it to my Canadian friends as sort of like maximalism, like with regards to all the senses, you'll get like extreme like levels of beauty, but also like extreme levels of the opposite of that, whatever word you want to put in that spot.
It's sights, smells, sounds, just everything is constantly at 100. There's just no dip.
Like 200 more, even more than that.
Yeah, 200 exactly.
So anyway, that was a fun diversion, I guess. So you were saying you're into grunge, and that resonated with you a lot more than, say, something like Black Sabbath and kind of what you had heard before that. Where did you go from there?
So I think obviously grunge really stayed with me because I was an angry kid. We were all angry kids, but I wasn't necessarily a violent. I didn't feel as aggressive. So mine was more like self-combustion, which is, very, very grunge. And also I sort of also discovered, like, I think the one thing that I felt I didn't have was I didn't have enough music. This is going to sound like such a stereotype, but female music, like non-male music. There was not a lot of it because, yeah, of course, there was a lot of pop stars and all of that, but I didn't necessarily relate to that kind of stuff. Although, I mean, now I think I really love Madonna because, what an iconic woman. But at the time, I didn't think it was for me. I was more, going towards Alanis Morissette and, basically the rock chick, which is when, and I was like, you know what, there's not a lot for me to listen to. So I'm just going to try and start writing some songs and, to kill time because I am an only child. So basically, like, my days as a kid would be to keep myself entertained.
Yeah, well, so I'm an only child as well, so I can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So, you kind of pick up skills and you basically do a bunch of things so you're not bored. And in a way that really works well into adulthood because you can be alone for days and you're just chill about it. Like, yeah.
Correct. So, and you become a good like a multitasker, like in terms of you learn how to do lots of different things, so that maybe you don't need a lot of different people to like complete a project. And
exactly. So I think so I started. I wanted to learn how to play guitar, so I sort of enrolled with a music teacher in Calcutta who used to be in a band called Lokhi Chara, which I mean, I love their songs. In fact, I should tune you into some Bangla band music.
You should. I'm always open to being educated in that regard.
Yeah, I think I think just last night I was listening to Rupam Islam's new album called Ami, and I'll send you the link. It's fantastic.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. So I started taking guitar lessons, and my exposure to Western music also grew. And I was like, because I was always a creative child, so I would, doodle and write rhymes and stuff. So I was like, okay, well, let's try and make songs. So that happened, and my breakthrough happened when I was 18, and there's a place in Kolkata called Someplace Else.
Yeah.
So back in the day, it was like the mecca of music. Like every musician wanted to play at Someplace Else. So this band who would play at Someplace Else, they had an opening for a vocalist. So I was like, I didn't think much of it because, I'm a high school kid. I have like zero responsibility. And so I'm like, okay, let's go audition. And then I got the job. And this is when I had like zero skills. So because I'm not a trained singer. So this is when I didn't even know how to hold a mic or, I was, let's just say I was not very good to put it mildly.
You got to start somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think my first gig ever, Someplace Else being the first gig is a pretty cool thing because I had a stage, and then next thing I know, we have a weekly slot at this place. And this used to be on weekdays at midnight. So it also kind of taught me how to balance school and music, because my parents were like, okay, we'll let you do this, but your academics can't suffer because, like music is such an unstable, like no parent would want their child to, be musicians or
correct.
artists. Like it's not a very safe thing. I don't want to discourage other people, but you know what I'm saying, right? It's not
absolutely.
a very safe option. So parents are always looking out for their kids. So I was juggling the band for a couple of years. And that's where I met Rohit, who used to be the bass player. And he was like, you know what? Like, there's a lot of cover music happening in Calcutta. So let's try and make some music. Like, let's write our own songs and da-da-da. So that's how Ganesh Talkies happened. And next thing I know, I'm right here we're having this conversation. So
No, I'm glad. I'm glad to finally
That's
know
the
that
journey.
story.
Yeah.
The thing of two interesting things about Someplace Else, with regards to me, is that I think I'm pretty sure the first place I ever saw like live rock music in India was at Someplace Else. And it was back in 2007, I think.
They started, I think, in the late 90s. So it's been, now I'm not sure. I haven't visited for a long time, but like they've been at it for over 20 years. So that's pretty cool, actually.
It's got a rep, and it's funny. The last time I was there was 2 years ago, and I had been there a few times. And I finally realized that the name of the place was Someplace Else, because like normally when people would talk about going there, they would say we're going to someplace else, and they would say it in a sentence in such a way that I just thought that they were not specifying the place that we were going to. I didn't realize that was so. It finally only sunk in 2 years ago when I
Actually went.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so the name of the place is Someplace Else. Right. Okay, cool.
I could see why this could be very confusing.
Yeah. No, it had me. It was. I'm pretty slow on the uptake, I'll be honest. So that's an interesting story of the origins of the Ganesh Talkies. And how long were you guys kind of on the go? Like for how many sort of releases did you guys put out?
I think we had one full length album and 2 EPs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think because we were around for about 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. So, and we did a lot of tours. So because I remember by the end of it, we had like a nice 3-hour long set list of all our songs. So yeah,
that must be a good feeling to be able to like just say, if you need to play for 3 hours, we got you.
Exactly. And I think since we are from Calcutta, and back in the day cover music was such a dominant thing that everybody wanted to book you if you could play Pink Floyd or Bryan Adams and all of that. Mm-hmm. I think that really sort of made us a little bit obstinate, because we were like, no, we don't want to do that. We have our own stuff, which is equally entertaining. So, give it a shot. And we can also play for a long time. So yeah, the choice is yours.
Maybe that explains why you guys had so much energy, because maybe you had something to prove in that regard.
That, but also, I think we had energy because we genuinely had fun being on stage. Because the 4 of us, we were all friends. It wasn't just a band where we'd come together and play music. Like even off rehearsal and when we weren't necessarily playing music, we were still hanging out, and mm-hmm. we were all very close. So that kind of reflected in the music, the camaraderie.
Yeah, I bet it does. Yeah, that type of chemistry always shines through.
Yeah. So in a sense, we were basically a bunch of kids who were friends, and they didn't think too much of it. We were like, let's just see where this goes, and we didn't take ourselves too seriously. I think that which kind of worked for us.
I've found in my life that my general success tends to correlate negatively with how seriously I take myself. So the more seriously I take myself, the worse I end up doing. And then when I don't take myself seriously, things go pretty well.
Exactly. It's because it's music is. It's meant to be felt and, all of that. But if you're being, rigid and if you're in your head too much, then the magic just goes away somehow. Because that's for me as well,
Yeah, well said. So I guess there's only one, in terms of Plastic Parvati, there's that one release that was kind of like, was it an album or a double something?
So Plastic Parvati, I would call it an album. It's definitely an album, because when I started writing for it, I had a clear theme in my head where there was a particular story that I wanted to tell. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what, these songs, sort of help me start and have a body and then finish it off. So yeah, that was an album. That's the only serious release I've had so far. Otherwise, it's just me, fucking around on SoundCloud and
those SoundCloud
stuff out.
Those SoundCloud fuck-arounds are important. I recently have taken a bunch of my SoundCloud fuck-arounds, and I'm putting them out on I'm calling it a beat tape. But yeah, it's important to have those fuck around releases as well. In terms of the concept for the album, what was the name of the album again?
It was called Songs About Lovers.
Right. Yeah, that sounds familiar. I feel like I should have just known that.
No worries.
So you kind of mentioned there was a concept. Is that something you want to elaborate on, or do you want to just leave it to the listeners to figure it out?
So I think the concept was basically, obviously they'll get it. It's not super hi-fi, but I think at the time my headspace was that I was very introspective, because this was when the band had broken up and I had a lot of time to myself, and I was trying to figure myself out, where I stood in terms of what my mental health was, where I was in terms of my sexuality, and I realized that I didn't have a lot of queer music available to me, and I'm not talking about globally yes, but locally, and not a lot of it was because I feel like as women we've been taught to keep our sexuality under, hide it in the closet, or just we're only allowed to be sexual when it's somebody else who's sort of allowed to profit off of it.
Right.
So these and I felt like these were major parts of me that I sort of had to get out of my system. So I was like, yeah, I am young, I am horny, I'm having sex, and I'm also not, sometimes I'm doing things, I'm doing drugs, but that doesn't mean that I won't talk about it, because I'm not a saint. It's so the album was basically kind of my way of just purging, like just blah, it's out of my system now.
No, it's an important kind of message to get out there, and it's good that you kind of did elaborate on that, because I'm pretty slow with lyrics, honestly. Like sometimes I'll listen to something like several times before. Like it's the reason why I'm a producer and not a songwriter. Like it takes several listens for lyrics to really kind of sink in. So no, I'm glad you kind of spoke about that. So since that time, I've kind of noticed from just like your Instagram posts and stuff like that you are getting more into like synthesis and exploring, the details of music production. Can you tell me a little bit about that journey? I mean, I had been on a similar journey with learning synthesis and that kind of stuff, and it's a lot of fun. How has it been for you? What kind of stuff have you discovered?
I will be very honest. For the longest time, I used to really hate on electronic music because I had no understanding of it. And, I assumed that electronic music or DJ music was basically just DJs remixing Bollywood songs. And I was like, what is this? This is not music. Anybody can do this. And, I used to hate on techno, and I was like, what is this? This is not like that. And then because I was at a point where I was like, okay, I don't have anybody to play music with, so my laptop is now my best friend. And I was like, obviously, I can't, if I want to make a beat, I don't want it to sound like a real drum kit when it's just me programming something. So I was like, let's try and figure out where these sounds come from. So, I started listening to this is I'm having a little bit of a brain fart. I'm just like looking at my records.
Those happen to me on a regular basis, the brain farts.
It's, like you're listening to this thing all the time, but then, you're supposed to like name the artist and you're like,
I find it a lot harder to remember song titles and even artist names in the era of streaming. Like when I used to buy physical copies, I mean, part of it could just be I was younger and I was just way more enthusiastic about like knowing the title of whatever the hell I was listening to. But I think probably the streaming era has something to do with that, where it's like there's this, like there might be some tune that I'm jamming to all the time, but I have no idea what it's called. I just know like where to find it.
It's true. Like I'll find myself, like I'm like, okay, I've heard this album thrice, but I don't remember any of the song names because I don't know. I kind of miss, the cassette tape rewinding and, or even if it's a record, then, just like flipping the record over.
I also miss liner notes.
Wait, what are those?
Just like, when you like say you buy a CD or something and you like open up the jacket,
the jackets,
you can
the
see all the
jackets,
you can
yeah,
see all the
yeah,
like credits, like especially as a producer, because I knew that I wanted to be a producer probably since I was about 17 or 18, and so like I would always look to see who produced what, and who were the musicians, and especially when I used to listen to like lots of rock. And but also hip hop and like lots of different types of music, and even the way that the credits would be listed depending on the type of music, because like say what it means to be a hip hop producer is like pretty different than what it means to be a rock producer. So it would be interesting to like read the liner notes, and like if you would just open up a random hip hop record, then each track would have a different producer, because in that sense it's like they're more of a beat maker or whatever. And then
or then the samples, if they're using samples, then what is the original song?
Yep, that's another thing.
Which
it's like
year?
Absolutely.
Stuff
So
like that.
those types of like, I miss having the liner notes and having that extra sort of stuff to dig into when I when I was younger. It was gratifying at some level to do that. And now, like I don't even know who's making the tracks that I'm listening to sometimes, or who's really involved. And I guess things have changed quite a bit in that sense.
In a way, I'm kind of glad that vinyl sort of, even though not very mainstream, but vinyl has sort of made a comeback, because now we all kind of, every time we release music, we sort of at the back of our head, we have an aspiration that we want this on vinyl, which means that we go back to the process of designing art around it, and then having all the information and maybe lyrics and thank you notes, etc., etc. So I'm a pro vinyl, cassette, CD, basically physical copies of music. I know it's totally redundant, but I just like to hold the music in my hands.
Yeah, I'm really down with physical copies, and I still have something like 700 plus CDs in a storage locker in Toronto somewhere. You can't argue with the convenience of streaming, and also as artists, just the fact that we can get our stuff out there, immediately, stream of consciousness. That's also quite cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one thing that I find is that people, like, especially maybe artists that have come up more in the streaming era, like the idea of giving credit, or like how the credit is listed, is like it's not as it doesn't come to people's mind as much. Like for me, if I'm kind of uploading something to SoundCloud, I'll I'll make sure if other people have been involved in making that, I'll like put that stuff in the notes, in the comments or whatever, not comments, description.
Just description.
But some people kind of do forget to do that. But
it's also because I feel like, for me, again, since I come from that band background, which is a very collaborative effort, especially if you're going into a studio to record with a producer, that means that it's not just the 4 or 5 of you, it's a whole team that's actually helped and put together this record, right? So
yeah, correct.
That versus, I think, if you're like, because now I am a bedroom producer, where I'm like, sometimes I ask my friends to do things for me, but I kind of take it for granted that, oh shit, he actually helped me with that, or they actually sang on this, so it's easy for the information to kind of slip. So
that's true. Maybe things do.
Maybe as artists we have to be a little bit careful to to at least see, most people don't want money or anything, they just want a credit. It's not that hard, really.
That's what I mean. It means so much just to like say, oh, like, hey, this person kind of contributed this thing or whatever it is. So okay, you were saying that you used to kind of like look down on electronic music, and that sort of started to change. Actually, the one thing I noticed that you were saying, which I would like to take note of and highlight, is when you moved into like programming drums in your laptop, you were like, obviously I don't want it to sound like a real drum kit. And I think that that's a critical insight, especially if you're coming more from a rock background. That is a mistake. Not a mistake, I shouldn't say it's a mistake, but it's like a thing that some people do, is they try to like recreate,
emulate
a live drum kit. And it's just like... Sorry, go ahead.
This I think again, working with Meaty or just having him mentor me, because when he makes a drum beat, he can make it sound like a kit, but this is also somebody who's one of the best in the world. So I don't expect to just wake up tomorrow and go like, oh yeah, my snare sounds just like a proper one. So so I was like, since I can't, I set very high standards for myself at the very beginning, I think, thanks to him. So I was like, okay, since I can't achieve this, then why don't I try and look into what an 808 or a 909 could possibly sound like? Because now, thanks to computers, we can actually emulate drum machines, and it's a little bit easier to chase those sounds, I think, because
But it's good to sort of understand that limitation and then just like accept it and then work. Like, okay, I can't do the like live drums in my computer right now. So I'm going to embrace these electronic sounds.
So it's kind of like, I think the Joy Division New Order situation really helped me, because, Joy Division were obviously a band, and, everything was super organic sounding. And then boom comes New Order, where they're making weird sounds, and, it sounds like incredible at the same time. So I was like, you know what, this is really cool. So the brain fart that I had basically was New Order. So I think New Order really kind of turned my life around, because I was like, oh my God, like Blue Monday, for example, that there's like that drum roll. And I'm just like, the first time I heard it, I was like, the fuck? I was just so fascinated. And that's when I started digging. And I think 2 years back, I was very lucky. There was a exchange program that I was a part of. So I was in Berlin for about 2 weeks.
Was that what's the name of that program?
So this is called Pop Culture. In fact, I think a lot of musicians don't know about this. It's called the Pop Culture Festival. And so the Goethe Institute, they have a program where 10 participants from Asia and Africa are selected to go to Berlin for, and it's like all expense paid, and you get to attend the festival, you get to attend workshops, and some people even get to perform at the festival. So I think Berlin really changed my worldview of electronic music, because I remember we had gone to a club and they were playing techno, and I was stone cold sober. It's not like I was on drugs or, I was drunk. But I have never heard anything like that in my life. Like, I don't know, I had this moment of clarity where I was like, oh, okay, so this is what people are on about.
I get
this is what techno is. Exactly.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience when I went to Europe, like for the first time, where like all of a sudden, when I was in the clubs in Europe, all of a sudden I was like, oh, like this is what people... Like, this is what it's about. That's
exactly.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you brought up this Berlin thing, because I was planning to ask you about it anyway, and I'm glad you just kind of like went there organically. So continue.
And it's also, I think what the other thing that I realized is that it's not just the music as well. It has a lot to do with infrastructure around. So yeah, sure, I can play techno music in my house, but space is also very important. And this is somewhere where sometimes I feel a little bit frustrated with India, because people, I don't think we truly let ourselves go when we dance. So even when we're hitting clubs here, there's always, sort of inhibition that everybody feels, no matter how good your moves are or no matter how good you're looking, and even if you're with your posse or friends. But I think all of us, we're very inhibited when we dance. But Berlin for me was very different. Like people didn't care. They were just, in their own space, and they were just dancing. That's all that they were doing. So, and I thought it was beautiful. It was almost spiritual. Like I at the risk of sounding like a hippie, but it felt super spiritual to just be able to let go of everything and dance. And I think that's something that I've been chasing after I kind of got back, which is, how do I kind of make music which makes me want to dance? Like, how do I let go of whatever inhibitions I have?
Yeah, and another thing I really like about, once you dig past the superficial layer of electronic music, like the sort of corny stuff that we kind of might hear at a superficial level, you also, I mean, I sense that you mentioned earlier being an angry kid. I myself have a pretty dark kind of view of the world, and it's nice. Nice is the wrong word, but it's nice to discover that there's all this really dark music that you can dance to.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be all, happy, chirpy synth lines and drum beats. It does so much. I think now I sort of struggle with because sometimes when people ask me, oh, okay, so what kind of music do you play? and they ask me, what kind of electronic music do you play? I don't have an answer because, again, there's so many genres to electronic music.
You don't have to answer that question. You just
Well, yeah, I tell them the truth. I tell them that I haven't heard it enough to, sort of put my music in a category somewhere. But it's so, and it's kind of like going down the rabbit hole. So, once you're on, you've discovered something. So this was like my grunge part 2, where I was like, oh wow, there exists this world. So I share something like super funny with you. So my friend Shorjo Oblique, he's in Bombay currently, but he has this beautiful modular synth. And so he was in Finland when he built his synth, and I think he was visiting in summer or something. He was in Calcutta. So he was like, hey, I made a synth and you want to check it out? I was like, yeah, let's have a jam. So I had no idea what a modular synthesizer was till then.
What a fun world that is once you get into it.
Yeah, and he comes over and he's carrying like a suitcase. So I'm like, yeah, but like, where are the damn black and white keys? How do I play this thing? So
it's like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Exactly. And then, he sort of like broke it down and he was like, this goes into this and da-da-da. So it was like a wonderful evening of just me trying to figure out what happens where. And I had that wow, mind blown kind of moment. So then I discovered the whole world of modular synths. And I was like, wow, there's synths without keys. Yeah.
Oh, that cool. Stuff is really, really interesting. I've been getting into it in my own way. I've been doing it all in the box, but I've been kind of acquiring different plugins and VSTs that sort of emulate that. Like I downloaded this one VST that's just a kick drum designer. Like that's all it does is it's a kick drum designer. And then there's another one that's just like a bass designer. And then I started to think like, well, can I just have like can I make my own hi-hat designer from scratch? And like, then I was like, okay, like what if I don't want to like input the hi-hat pattern? Is there another way that I can like control, like, I ended up acquiring like the type of MIDI controller that I never thought I would ever acquire, which is it's just a bunch of knobs. It's like that's all.
I've seen you like play with it. Like I'm like that. It looks fascinating.
It's
like
great because it's like I'm trying to think of like a different way of performing and inputting the music instead of like even instead of programming it. So with like say a hi-hat designer, like I mean you can just use like white noise and some stuff, right? But like then I was like, okay, if I don't want to input a hi-hat pattern and I just like leave a MIDI note on and then I like stick an arpeggiator before that MIDI note. And then like if I just set up one of the knobs to like change the tempo of the arpeggiator, then that could be like my hi-hat generation machine or whatever. Like just I'm trying to like create these modules obviously in Ableton. Ableton. I was just going to say that, I think for all of us globally, Ableton has been such a godsend because there's just so much you can do with it. It's crazy. Like so many different ways you can go with it, and the interface is so elegant and different than other DAWs, and it's. I like the fact that you can like say if you're say you just want like a piano sound, you have that, but at the same time if you really want to get into modulating that sound, you can really get into that as well. So I love the two. I like the extremes that it kind of offers. Like in a way, sometimes it puts me in a rabbit hole because I try and chase a sound, and by the time that I've reached it, I've forgotten what my original idea was. But that's fine. That's how it's done. That's how we do it. Yeah, it's
I've
good.
just gone somewhere else completely. But it's so and I also feel like electronic music. There's been so many spaces that have opened up because of electronic music. Because so now like I said before, I'm still discovering. I'm still checking out new music, and every other day I'll be like, oh my god, wow, this is the best thing I've ever heard.
Yep.
So I still have my moments.
I'm amazed at people that say things like, oh, like there's no good music anymore, and it's like, are you nuts? Like there's too much good music everywhere. I can't even keep track of it. I feel like I need to like it's almost like there's so much that I have to I can't I can't even make up my mind about what to listen to, and
Exactly.
instead I end up reading a book because I just can't figure. That's the
And
problem.
I am actually not a fan of the whole school which thinks that music is not as good as it used to be, because
that does make
that's not
sense.
true.
Yeah.
That's completely not true. I think just yesterday, I don't know, have you heard the band Mets? They're Canadian.
I
aren't
haven't.
they? Yeah. Oh, I think I won't tell you much about them.
How do you
but
spell it?
If you METZ.
Okay, I will
Mets.
look it up.
So if you like grunge music, and I'm talking like, say, early Nirvana,
Grunge is my era. I mean, I grew up
exactly. So
in
I
that,
think
yeah.
you'll be in for a good surprise.
Cool.
So like stuff like that. There's so much happening, and also thanks to the internet, as much as I crib about it, but at least we finally have access. So it's like, if I don't like what's being played on VH1 or MTV, I can just choose to not engage.
Yeah.
It's
That
as simple as
access
that.
thing is really interesting, like how it really has equalized so many things. I mean, equalized is maybe a crude way of putting it, but like just globally now, on the one hand you have like the internet and like access to different kinds of music, and on the other hand you have something like Ableton, which gives the access in terms of the means of production, right? And so now there's this like global community. Like if we can't find something in where we're at geographically, we can log on and find somebody somewhere in the world that's doing something that resonates with us.
Exactly. It's communicating. I think because also with all of us in the music industry, going back to mental health again, we're all obviously, we have a certain level of sensitivity because, we unfortunately, we are kind of born in a way where we are very sensitive to the world. And sometimes, we neglect our own needs. And I feel like having this sort of global community, for me personally, has been very beneficial because, sometimes when I want to talk about some things and I'm not sure people around me would relate to it, I hit up one of my musician friends, who's sort of experiencing something else, but maybe she's in Brazil or maybe one of them is in London. So and the fact that, we can all resonate and we can share and bounce ideas off of each other, it's been such a welcome change in my life. It's because we have to take care of each other and we have to take care of ourselves, at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it's kind of interesting you mentioned that because I kind of wanted to ask you about this anyway because I obviously follow you on Instagram, and so besides the music posts, which I am a big proponent of, you do like yoga from time to time. You're a bit of a headstand master. We've seen that. So the reason I ask you that is because it's like you mentioned about mental health and the kind of the struggles that we have as musicians, as freelancers, as creatives.
Anybody creative.
I mean, it's not just something that happens to creatives. I'm sure plenty of people that have.
Yeah, of course. Everybody has their share of struggles.
We have our unique set of challenges. And on while that's ongoing, in the time that I've followed you, I've seen that you have this other aspect where it seems like you're pursuing wellness. I don't know, So can you tell me a little bit about if you've managed to incorporate some more self-care and wellness in your life, or if you've struggled to do that, or how's that?
I think it's a mix of the two because I've always been, right from even music or no music, I have always been very open about my sort of mental health and the fact that I was diagnosed with depression when I was like 12 or 13. So, and I've spoken up and I've spoken to people at length about it because I don't feel shy in talking about it because I'm like, this is a part of me. So,
no, it should be talked about more, especially in our culture, people don't talk about it enough. And then, people get into all kinds of...
what good does that do? Exactly. Yeah. So, yoga was obviously something that I started doing to take better care of my body. This is when, the band was doing a bunch of gigs and we were rehearsing all the time and my back was just giving way. So I was like, oh my God, I'm 20 years old. I can't have a bad back. That's insane. Yeah. So that's how I that's how I got into it. And then obviously, once you start practicing, you realize that it's not just the physical movement, but it also helps your mind.
Yep.
So,
very similar experience I had.
Exactly. And which is why I feel like, you can totally understand what I'm saying. And So I think there are days when, I struggle because obviously, no, I can't be 100 at all times.
It's a process. It's not
It's
like
a process,
there's no
exactly.
destination. It's like a day-to-day practice, you know?
Yeah, and I think right now obviously it's things are weird because we've been just all of us have been quarantined at home, which is also something that I was just thinking about, which is everybody's actually very vulnerable now because something about just being able to go outside, just go for a walk and all of that. Since we
Yep.
don't have those freedoms, it's kind of very important to calm yourself and sort of focus and be mindful basically of not going off the rails too much. So yeah, I think wellness. I feel like I don't have a choice to not look after myself because there have been periods previously where I haven't functioned very well, and I'm like, I don't want to voluntarily feel bad anymore. I think
Yeah, that's I'm with you on that. And for me as well, yoga and it started. It started pretty much as like, okay, like this is good for my physical health, cool. And then pretty quickly, like you're just like, this has an amazing effect on my mind. And it's not something that you always maintain. It's not like it stays at that level all the time. There are these ups and downs, but
exactly.
overall, it really helps. And certainly, I've noticed that you've been practicing that, and
but also with yoga and wellness in general, I feel like since there's so much information and so much social media, there's a constant pressure to be happy. So the other thing I because I think everybody's always happy and everything's always cheery. So I think somewhere we're not allowing ourselves to be sad, but that is also very important, because you need your moments when you need the sadness, basically.
Yep.
You can't just like say, no, fuck it, I'm not going to pay any attention to you because you're not good and you're not worthy.
Yeah.
So I think I'm still sort of trying to find that balance, and obviously it's not something that I can do in one day. So this is going to be like a lifelong journey. But I think I'm just finding that balance between happy, sad.
Absolutely.
That nice sweet spot.
Would you say that like you've improved over the time you've been doing yoga, like since you started? Has it like there's still the ups and downs, but overall has it become less volatile or
Yes, definitely. And I think once, because I used to be, it's a combination of doing more yoga when I got off the meds, because I used to be on medication before. And my goal was at some point to get to a point where I wouldn't be dependent on them. So that's just something like a personal goal, it doesn't have to apply to others. So that's when I started pushing the yoga. So I think now I'm at a stage where obviously, I have a lot more responsibility because I'm not 20 years old anymore. I have bills to pay and all that. So now it's kind of reached a point where I'm like, yeah, okay, I know if I don't do this for a couple of days, I'm not going to feel very good. So I'll sneak in a little bit here and there, maybe try and be mindful for a minute or two during the day. So yeah, I think. But I don't know, it's kind of hard to say because, on some days I'll wake up and I'll be like, today I'm going to wreck my body by doing all the asanas that I know. And the next 3 days are basically just like, no, let's just stretch. Let's go easy. So it's pretty erratic, but whatever works for you, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, no, that's it makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. Cool. So continuing with your journey about, I think we left off with modular synthesis. So is that kind of where was that after the album that you put out, the solo album, or did you like where are you at with that now?
Definitely much. So modular synthesis, modular music is something that I have a deep interest in, but it's more like me taking a class, like as in like signing up for a class that I want to attend. I'm not sure I want to have my own rack yet. Yeah. Because, again, since I am primarily a singer-songwriter, it's a
commitment to have that piece of gear. It's just like,
exactly.
It's a rabbit hole of,
I'm not, I feel like I'm not there yet. Although, so do you know about Synth Farm? So I'm like shamelessly plugging my friends, but
Well, no, I'm glad you're doing it on your own, because these are all points that I wanted to ask you about, and you're just effortlessly going from point to point without me asking you about it. So it's working out well.
Because synth farm was again because I used to play guitar, and then I got into laptop based production. I know nothing about synths, and I'm still learning. So synth farm is this retreat. It's this sort of workshop retreat situation that happens once a year in Calcutta. It's off Calcutta, where you can sign up, and I think this year there were about 30 of us. It's organized by Varun Desai.
Oh yeah,
and
I've met him a few times. He's a really cool cat.
Yeah. Oh, he's amazing. And Samrat, so Audio Pervert. It's kind of their baby. So it's basically a bunch of synthheads just getting around, jamming, learning, and it's a lot of fun. So I went for Synth Farm this year, and then I'm always that kid who has like a bunch of stupid questions like, how do you do this? How do you do that? So I kind of piqued everybody's brain a little bit, and we got to make our own module. That was pretty cool. So we all came back home with a poker synth. So I've been fucking around with it.
That's very cool.
And it was it was amazing to know that there's a community of synth lovers in India, and some people had even traveled from outside. So it was really fun just to know that it's not a very mainstream thing, but and there's not a lot of people who are into this, but there is a small but dedicated and growing community.
Yep.
So
and you can learn. I mean, you don't necessarily have to get a rack to continue learning about it. Like there's so much that you can learn in the box. Like I know some sort of aficionados may kind of possibly turn their nose up at that, but I'm a nomadic by circumstance, and so I definitely don't have the luxury of getting the fancy outboard kind of stuff, and I've benefited a lot from just the different softwares that you can mess around with, and even Sorry, go ahead.
I see you doing a lot of reading as well. So that's something that, I think as musicians, we forget that it's not just about the gadgets. Sometimes it's fun to read, because I see on your Instagram, I'll see you extensively reading. So
yeah, I have to. Yeah. I don't have a Netflix account. I don't know what TV shows people are watching. And I sometimes I feel some minor FOMO as a result of that. But for the most part, I'm happy that books are really interesting. I find it. I read a lot about, say, history, philosophy, politics, those kind of things.
Yeah, I've seen.
It's really interesting to just know what's going on in the world, and also how we got to this point. You know what I mean? And we're living in a moment where the people are trying to rewrite history for their own purposes. I guess it's always been a thing, but it's an acute problem at the moment. And so, I've been enjoying digging into Indian history, both ancient and sort of more recent history. And also, being a foreign-born Indian with this accent, there's that extra bit of knowledge that I have to acquire just to have some basic level of credibility as a person living here.
I know. Yeah, true.
There is that.
What to do?
But no, so I love reading. I think you have to pull from somewhere, and it doesn't have to necessarily be books, although I tend to recommend that everyone should read. But there are some people that they just have this one thing that they do. Like I just do music all day, and then when I don't understand where they pull their creativity from if they don't have this other thing, at least one other thing. I mean, preferably it should be many things, but.
And something preferably nothing to do with music. That's honestly
absolutely.
the best thing to do.
I say that a lot. I say that a lot to people, and when a lot of your friends are musicians, we get into this scenario where you're just talking about music all the time with your music friends, and it's just okay, listen, let's go to the art galleries. Like I have this thing that I mean, we can't do it now because it's lockdown.
Yes,
but there's a bunch of art galleries in South Bombay that are kind of close together, and I would try my best, maybe once a month, to just go and take a different friend along with me and say, let's go hit all these art galleries, walk, an art gallery crawl. We'll do it on foot.
Yeah.
And nice. That kind of stuff. And it really it really opens up the mind. And actually, there's this book I read. It was I have read a few books on creative thinking, and one book, I was in Calcutta when I read this. Actually, it's The Art of Creative Thinking or something. And one of the things that they'd mentioned in that was basically what creativity is, if someone should dare to define it. But basically, from a scientific point of view, what it is the ability to sort of combine disparate ideas or juxtapose ideas that would normally not be related into and you know, fashion that into something new. And so what I find is that like I try to expose myself to as much novel stimulus as possible. And this is kind of what led me on Instagram to just start following visual artists aggressively.
Exactly.
Like
exactly.
just like unfollow all the things that I was like, why did I follow this weird celebrity? What is this? And then like I just aggressively follow artists. And I'm pretty like with music, I guess like I have to have some kind of level of taste because I'm a musician or whatever, although I don't know if that's necessarily true. But with visual arts, since I don't know much about that world, I just indiscriminately follow anything that I even think is kind of cool. And then like later, if I find a lot of stupid stuff coming from that account, I'll unfollow it later.
Yeah, I can just always unfollow.
And yeah, the constant, because you know we try not to be addicted to our phones, but they you know unavoidably you do pick it up in between tasks, and you just like scroll through Instagram. So like now the good thing is ever since I made this decision to just follow as many visual artists as possible, I kind of have like this art gallery in my pants. You know,
exactly.
in a weird way of putting it. But so like when I scroll through, it's just I'm guaranteed to get interesting things. And another good thing about that in the context of social media is, you know, as musicians, one of the disadvantages we have is that like, you know, to like experience what we do, you have to stick around for a minute. You can't just scroll. But with visual art, like you can kind of lean into the whole aspect of the fact that you're just scrolling through stuff. And so I found that has been a good way to just expose my mind to different creative ideas. And this brings me around to something else I wanted to ask you, because I think I noticed at some point over the last year that you had been doing some creative coding or something in that world. Am I mistaken about that? Or
that was so again the friend I was telling you about earlier, Shoujo. So he basically had this 2-day workshop in Calcutta where we would just basically and I come from like a history background. Like I had history in college, so I used to be very far away from science and computers and coding and all of that. So he was like, you know what, it's not that big a deal. I mean, of course, you're not going to be able to do like full-on video game design right away, but you want to check this out? So I was like, yeah, let's do it, because, you know, I'm always up for a new adventure. And that's when I sort of realized that there's this whole world of generative art. And in fact, I follow a lot of visual artists on Instagram as well, because there's just so much that I love it. Like, it's not something that I'm particularly good at, but it's something that I enjoy just dabbling.
Yeah, I get a lot from it, for sure. Just like, you know, it stimulates the mind in a way that I like. And the creative coding has been really interesting and an interesting outlet for, like, I've been exploring it. I kind of have fallen off over the last year because the current project I'm working on is it's been pretty intense. But I did this thing. Actually, I was in Calcutta when I did this as well. 2 years ago, I guess now, ish, on one of my trips to Calcutta, I just decided that I wanted to make like 5 K-pop remixes in 5 days. And so I like went online and just found like, I have no knowledge of K-pop. And I just randomly downloaded 5 acapellas of K-pop music. And once I did it successfully, like it only took me 5 days, 1 track per day, and it wasn't even the whole day, whatever, just a few hours, and that's good.
Couple of hours, yeah.
That means that maybe I'm getting better, hopefully. But around the same time, I got into this creative coding, and I had already taken like a coding course like a couple of years back. Okay. So I was like, and I had taken this programming course, and I found that I had no way to apply it, like unless I like start taking weird programming assignments from
Yeah.
strange companies. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
forget all the things I learned. But then I was like, wait a minute, there's this whole world of like generative art and creative coding.
Yeah.
And so I got into it and I realized like I wrote this one program that generated 5 unique pieces of artwork for each track on that K-pop
that you made.
EP. Yeah. So I was like, this is a great like thing
Nice.
that we can do as artists, and that's like a fun thing. And then it has interesting parallels with the world of synthesis as well. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people are also using that to make music, with the algorithms and
yeah.
so it's such a brave new world.
Yep.
It's obviously we still have the traditional aspects of music happening, but in terms of art as a whole,
Yep.
it's amazing what people have been doing with all the technology that's available. Like
There's all
you wanna
kinds of
maybe-
new territory we can kind of
Yeah,
delve
yeah,
into.
yeah. And it's just, obviously depending on what your interests are, the more you dig, the more you will find. And, it's quite wonderful. Going back to our whole, us being like single children, like with sibling-less children, where we're like, we know how to keep ourselves entertained, basically.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah. Very much so. So, okay, cool. So what do you, are you kind of got anything on the back burner now that you want to kind of maybe riff on with regards to, like, what do you...
Right now, obviously, I'm just hibernating at home. I'm just writing doodles, but we made a record. So this happened as a result of an exchange program between Berlin and Calcutta, the Border Movement Residency, I think in 2018. So we ended up, basically Golden Disco Ship, who's, one of my all-time favorite people and musicians. So she was in Calcutta for a month, and the idea was for her to collaborate with us local musicians and, play a gig. So there was Varun Desai on modular synths, Debjit on double bass, like an upright bass, and me on electronics, and Teresa on a bunch of like viola and a bunch of other instruments. So basically, 4 of us, got together and we were like, okay, we have to play this gig, so let's make music because, why not? Because we started jamming and the gig turned out pretty cool. So we thought we'd make a record. So she ended up, I think, coming back last year. And we recorded. So I think that record is almost ready.
Oh, very cool.
So I think hopefully we'll have it. Obviously, it got a little bit delayed because of the whole lockdown and all of that. But it's still, it's been mixed. But I think now we're sort of waiting for it to just take off. So I think hopefully it should be out by the end of the year. And it's been a very satisfying experience for me because this has kind of been like a band, but not at all, because, this is the first time that I approached it as not a typical singer-songwriter, but as a producer, as a electronic music producer. So, yeah, super new experience for me. So that's on. We're called Hotel Kali. And
That's the
hopefully
name
we'll
of
have
the
some-
project?
Yeah, that's the name of the project.
Cool. That's
So,
appropriate. I like it.
Yeah. So we should have some social media and all of that by the end of the year, hopefully. And otherwise, I think I want to do an EP next. I've kind of been dabbling. So right
EP
now I'm
as
still
your
in that-
solo
as Plastic Parvati.
Cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I haven't had a follow-up record, and I have a bunch of doodles, but now that I'm stuck at home 24/7, I'm like, okay, let's try and
The last one got
finish
some
it.
the last one got some critical acclaim, and I think I mentioned this before we started recording, but that track Boka Choda is like, man, that's my jam. It's very
I
good.
think most of my good stuff comes from just me not taking myself seriously at all. Like it's just me, drinking some Royal Stag, just plugging into the computer, going like, tu hi boka choda, and then
Yeah, no, that's how it's done out there. If anybody wants to know how it's done, that's how it's done.
Yep. Just don't take yourself so seriously. I think that's the only advice that I give other people, because that's something that I follow personally.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, hopefully I'll have a plastic EP, and yeah, that's about it. And I think post Synth Farm, I've also been just in Ableton itself. There's just so much that one can do. I think I'm really exploring the fuck out of that software at the moment.
I discover new stuff in there all the time.
Exactly.
Last year around this time, I really got into the whole idea of like piling different MIDI effects, not the audio effects, but the MIDI effects, and then generating like random melodies or chord progressions on the basis of just stacking those things.
Yep.
Yeah, that stuff is hilarious.
I think I'm obsessively using granulator on everything right now.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
I think I'm a little like this addiction needs to stop because now I think I'm going overboard. But I think that's been like my latest obsession, and I'm just like
there's so much that we can dig into there. We've been chatting for a little bit over an hour just now.
Yeah, I feel like we'll have to edit a bunch of things out after this.
Oh well, mostly it's been it's all usable, so I'll only edit stuff out as per your request. But what I wanted to ask you before maybe we end the conversation is there any type of social media things, or like, I mean, there's Ganesh Talkies on SoundCloud. Is there other things you would like people to follow or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and Facebook and SoundCloud. No, actually, SoundCloud is different. I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Plastic Parvati.
Okay.
And my SoundCloud is just Suyasha. So
cool.
I couldn't be hot and bothered to change the domain name for that one.
I think if you change the name, it just changes the domain on its own without too much hassle. I changed my domain name at one point, and it didn't bother me about it. It didn't give me any issues.
I just didn't like, because I'm like, I treat my Instagram as my journal almost. So if you want to hear my raw stuff, I think just head to my SoundCloud, because that's where, all my doodles are, my song doodles are.
Cool.
Or my Instagram.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been fun talking to you.
Yeah, definitely.